Today we're going to be covering lesson 36-2, which covers another measure of variability. We talked about this yesterday, or we started to talk about it yesterday. Today we're going to talk about using summations and subscript notation, calculating and interpreting the standard deviation of a numerical data set, and we're going to select appropriate measures of spread by examining the shape of a distribution. Now, you should have already seen this paragraph. It was on the previous slide. So let's take a look at the data and talk about the sections that we're going to be covering today. We're going to chunk this lesson into 4 separate sections. So the first section that we're going to be covering is questions 1 to 3. It says, first, calculate the mean for those 10 talk times above. 2, complete the table below by finding the absolute values of the deviation, the absolute value of the difference between each data value and the mean, similar to what we did yesterday. And then number 3 says the mean absolute deviation, remember we call that MAD, for this data set is the mean of the 10 absolute deviations above. Calculate the MAD. So on this particular set of questions, I'm going to give you approximately, we'll go with 7 minutes. 7 minutes to work through questions 1, 2, and 3. First, you're going to have to find the mean. Then you're going to need to do the deviations. And then lastly, you're going to need to find the mean of absolute deviation. So go ahead, pause your video. As you can see, the answers to questions 1 through 3 have now been given to you. The first thing I did was I added all the way through the 10 sets of hours here. I divided by 10 and I got 12.568 hours is my average or my mean of the original data. Now, what 2 does is it tells us how far off of the mean were we. Now, remember that this is absolute value. So notice that none of my answers are negative. So hopefully you went back and you did the absolute value, not just the deviation, because then you would have gotten some negatives in there as well, and that would have thrown off your answer to number 3. Lastly, for number 3, what we're going to do is we are going to add all the numbers in this column plus all the numbers in this column. What that does is that gives me my total deviation, and then I divide by 10, and this gives me my mean absolute deviation because I'm finding the average of it. Now, let's talk about the difference between 1 and 3. 1 is giving me the average of all the talk times. 3 is giving me how far, or the average of how far people were off from the average. So it gives me the deviation from how far they off of the mean. Because remember that this formula is time minus the mean. Time minus the mean. So this is just the difference between the two. And then we find the average of the differences, basically. On to your debriefing question.